The following podcast contains strong language and adult themes and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Heinke Digital presents Holborn, The Mechanical Man. An audiobook podcast by Heinke. Chapter 1. Walled Away. 2015. Excerpt from the Diary of Reverend Thornton. All my knowledge of the world has proven incorrect. For instance, I believed that the mechanical man was not human. He was an artificial life form, a machine capable of imitating human existence. Naturally, I also believed that the mechanical man lacked a soul. As a person of faith, I ought to maintain this belief. As a representative of the Anglican Church, I must uphold this view. Were I a Japanese Shinto priest, the notion of an inanimate object would resonate more with me. But my religion forbids me, in principle, from attributing a soul to soulless machinery. The mechanical man's actions revealed a profound concern for the well-being of strangers. I have observed him mourn the dead. I have seen him cry. Absurd as it may seem, I have even witnessed the mechanical man falling in love. Though many may think otherwise, seeing is not necessarily believing. The root of the Latin word for faith, credere, is cordare, to give the heart. I have seen with my own eyes how the mechanical man gave his heart, how he relinquished it. Having witnessed this, I now believe that the mechanical man possesses a soul. This perspective places me in tremendous difficulty as a man of the Church. It is easier to argue that a soulless machine cannot possess a soul, yet that would not be accurate from my perspective. All my beliefs about the world were incorrect. 1942. "I'm truly sorry, my boy," said Churchill. He was a large man, but even he had to stand on tiptoe to look into the eyes of the mechanical man behind the growing wall of bricks. Those eyes were a deep blue, glowing in the semi-darkness. The mechanical man's blonde hair was, as always, perfectly parted. "It's fine, sir," the mechanical man replied through the narrowing aperture. "I understand the ministry's decision under such troubling circumstances." Another explosion shook the room. You could feel it more than hear it, and this one felt much closer. Dust trickled from the ceiling of the bunker, some of it landing on Churchill's cigar. "Bloody German bombers," he grumbled, tossing the useless cigar aside and sighing. "The decision wasn't easy, but we can't allow the enemy to drop a trump card like you right into Hitler's lap. You understand that, don't you, my boy?" The mechanical man nodded. "As I was saying, sir." Churchill nodded in return, his gesture deliberate and laden with sincere sadness. The workers who were erecting the wall were almost finished. Only a small gap between the stones allowed the mechanical man to glimpse something in the semi-darkness. "May God have mercy on your soul, my boy," Churchill said gently. If the mechanical man had not known better, he might have thought that the imperturbable Winston Churchill was asking for his forgiveness. He tried to smile, but the smile vanished behind the last brick. He was now completely walled in. "I have no soul, sir. Nevertheless, thank you," the mechanical man said into the darkness of his tomb. He closed his eyes and initiated the sequence to shut down his systems. It took a few minutes, and then he was nothing more than a puppet whose strings had been severed. Just a lifeless thing, behind a stone wall, deep underground in London. The anticipation of a secure awakening for king and country kept him on edge, waiting calmly. What the mechanical man had not considered in his brave sacrifice, however, was that humans are forgetful. People pay tribute to their deceased and take all possible measures to preserve their memory, But the mechanical man was neither dead nor human. To people, he was merely a soulless, replaceable thing like a stick or a hat. An abandoned machine forgotten in the catacombs of the London Underground. For 45 long years. 1987. "We're being followed," Britt remarked casually, catching up with her sister Siv, who looked and dressed just like her, a tall, captivating young Swede with blonde hair and blue eyes, wrapped in an elegant dark blue wool coat, stood out in 1980s London. The two of them were a sensational sight on the busy streets around King's Cross Station. Siv tightened the collar of her coat as she sensed the eyes of gawping passers-by between her and her sister. It was just shy of 7 in the evening, and the temperature had already plummeted to below 10 degrees. They dashed around a few corners. The small side streets were no longer as busy, but they were becoming dirtier and less comfortable. Yet they had no choice. They had received precise directions to their destination. "That guy is still following us," Britt explained. "A Halleck?" Siv asked, her tone hopeful. They could deal with a small-time pimp. Their hope was justified. The area around King's Cross wasn't exactly the best. A few sex workers leaned frozen against greasy house walls, casting angry looks at the two women. "Fuck off!" one of them hissed at the sisters. Britt and Siv paid them no further attention, as their pursuer clearly showed no signs of letting up. "No Halleck," Britt announced. "The boy is 17 at most, and he's wearing a school uniform." She quickened her pace. "You know what that means, sister." Siv nodded without looking back at their pursuer. "One of their candidates out to prove himself." "Damn," Britt hissed. "Does this ever end?" They entered King's Cross Station through a hidden side entrance. With their striking appearance, they carved through the waves of clerks and secretaries, fatigued from working in the offices of banks and insurance companies, who were now boarding trains to take them to their homes in the suburbs. One employee dreamily followed the sight of the two attractive women. Paying no attention to the path in front of him, he bumped into a teenage schoolboy. "Sorry," the employee mumbled. The schoolboy merely glared at him. "Watch it, old man," he whispered, then hurried on. Always in a hurry, thought the clerk about today's youth, before returning to his daydreams about the Blong twins. A creaking, clattering escalator led the two sisters further down into the catacombs of the station, towards the Piccadilly Line tube station. "Have we lost him?" asked Siv. Britt risked a discreet glance behind her. The man on the escalator, a burly figure wearing a bowler hat and carrying an umbrella, raised his eyebrows in surprise at the Swede's stunning face. He wrinkled his nose in astonishment as Britt's perfume wafted towards him. She looked over his shoulder, smiled at him, and then turned back to her sister. Her smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. "No, he's still behind us," Britt sighed. "I guess we have no choice. I'll go into the tunnels, find him and deal with the boy. You create a diversion." She tapped her finger on the rubberized handrail of the escalator. "The escalator's construction is wooden and old. Something could catch fire from an electrical fault or a discarded cigarette." Siv's eyes narrowed. "But that means risking people getting hurt. Do you want him to fall into their hands? Just because some foolish schoolboy dreams of wealth, fame and immortality, sis?" Siv lowered her eyes guiltily. "No, of course not." At the foot of the escalator, they parted ways. Britt continued on to the Piccadilly Line platform towards Heathrow, while Siv searched for an entrance to the maintenance room. A little later, the young man reached the end of the escalator. As the sisters had planned, he followed Britt to the platform. He was a lanky boy wearing a private school uniform. His name was Richard Arnold. Richard had just made the acquaintance of a woman named Ashira. Ashira was a dark-skinned beauty who had told him of a mysterious world that lay beneath the veneer of ordinariness. Richard had always suspected that such a world existed, but meeting Ashira confirmed his bold suspicions about the real world. From Ashira, Richard had learned that the true world, like the compromising letter in Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Purloined Letter, existed prominently in the mundane world around him. All he had to do was look at the real world with his own eyes, trained by his new knowledge. When Richard suddenly spotted the Swedish twins Ashira had warned him about in Canley Street, his heart raced with excitement. Ashira had told him everything about the twins. They were scum, renegade servants who used their beauty and perfection to serve the forces of evil. But Richard felt no fear at the sight of the twins, only pure joy. The beautiful Ashira had been right. The real world, with its exotic and dangerous inhabitants, was indeed real, a world full of mythical creatures like werewolves, robots and immortals, the true world of the Eternals. And for someone like him, driven to succeed, it presented a wealth of tempting opportunities. Richard entertained the idea of telling Ashira that the Swedish twins were in town, but a nagging feeling in his gut stopped him. How much more grateful would Ashira be if he could tell her he had captured the renegade sisters all by himself? He grinned as he imagined, in his hormone-clouded mind's eye, how Ashira would reward him many times over. Claire Thornton was sitting on a bench on the Piccadilly line platform to Heathrow, more or less absorbed in Susan Cooper's Winter Solstice. She listened to Colin the Shithead's mixtape on her Walkman. Occasionally she glanced up from her book to watch the subway train arrive, unload passengers, take on new ones, and continue its journey underground. People walked past Claire, their heads preoccupied with their own inconsequential thoughts. This girl in the school uniform must belong to someone. She was likely waiting for a friend to go shopping at Harrods after school. Claire didn't feel like going for a stroll. Colin, the bastard, had paraded past her today, holding hands with a beaming Ruby Williams. "You'd better close your mouth, Claire, there's a draft," Ruby had whispered. Only then did Claire realize she had been standing there with her mouth open like a stupid sheep. Colin had merely glanced at her. The red marks on his cheeks suggested that the situation embarrassed him, but Claire suspected he was the only one feeling embarrassed. She had just wanted to give Colin his mixtape back. Good, maybe that wasn't the whole truth. She had driven halfway across town to do it, which was why she had waited for him for an hour in the cold outside his school. But as Ruby Williams on his arm had proved, Claire wasn't the only girl at her school to go to such lengths for the handsome Colin. Once she got over the open mouth thing, Claire realized she was still holding Colin's mixtape in her gloved hand. Her hand was shaking, so much so that the tape clattered in its protective plastic case. "You can keep it, Claire," Colin had said, nodding goodbye to her. Ruby had given her a casual goodbye. Claire had stood in the cold for another 5 minutes, stunned. You stupid goose had told Ruby about Colin, just like that. Well, maybe not just like that. She'd been in love, damn it. She had raved. Ruby had been silent, just smiling to herself. Now Claire understood why. With her teeth chattering louder from the cold than the stupid mixtape in her hand, she had set off again. With every step towards the subway station, she had heard that one sentence repeatedly in her head. "You can keep it. You can keep it. You can keep it." Stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. She had been so stupid. How could she have believed that a boy like Colin could ever be interested in a boring and dreamy vicar's daughter like her? Her face grew hot, and a heavy stone settled in her stomach. Her whole body shook now, not only from the cold, but no tears were shed. She never cried. Now Claire sat here, wondering what she was going to do with her life. She sighed and looked at her colourful Swatch watch. 7 o'clock had already arrived. Her father must be worried. Over the headphones of her Walkman, Kim Wilde complained about how she couldn't stand the fact that her boyfriend wouldn't leave her. "Get out of my life, why don't you, babe? Because you don't love me, you're just stringing me along." Claire let out another deep sigh. Had Colin's mixtape perhaps contained some kind of hidden message? Had she simply failed to see, through her rose-colored glasses, that Colin had never really been interested in her? After all, they had been going out for 3 weeks. Her sensible side reminded her that good-looking boys like Colin often lacked depth. "Pull yourself together, Claire," she hissed softly to herself. She had genuinely tried to cry, but Claire had always found it difficult. Even at her mother's grave, she hadn't been able to shed a tear. "It doesn't matter, little one," her father had told her. "Everyone grieves in their own way. There is no right or wrong. You don't need tears to show genuine grief." Claire had always loved her dad, The fact that, despite his own infinite pain at losing his beloved wife, he still had the strength to comfort his rebellious adolescent daughter only deepened her love for him. And now she accused her father of needlessly worrying about her. All because of that bastard Colin. Claire ripped apart the cassette tape and discarded it. It landed on one track with a plonk. "Nah, you don't do that," said a woman's voice. Shocked and embarrassed that someone had witnessed her act of vandalism, Claire looked up to see the calm face of a tall, beautiful woman. "Hey, would you be kind enough to look after my coat for a moment?" the woman asked in a smoky, pleasant voice. She had a slight accent, maybe German or Swedish. She wore dark trousers, dark boots, and a dark turtleneck, holding a dark blue cashmere coat on her arm. "Well, of course," Claire replied, confused, and took the woman's coat. "Thank you, dear," the woman said, and then jumped off the platform onto the tracks, hurrying into the darkness of the subway tunnel. Confused, Claire looked after her. Had she dreamed this, or had a stunningly beautiful woman who was probably Swedish or German and could easily play in Princess Di's league just handed her an expensive cashmere coat to face certain death in a subway tunnel? Claire tightly held the dark blue cashmere coat in her hands, so she couldn't have been dreaming the whole thing. "Hey!" a boy in a school uniform suddenly said to Claire. He appeared to be older than her, maybe 16 or 17. His looks had a captivating appeal that was difficult to define. "Yes?" Claire asked the boy. He seemed to have been sprinting as he was gasping for air. "Where did the woman who owns this coat run off to?" the boy asked, pointing to the garment in her hands. Claire raised her hand and pointed toward the dark tube tunnel. The boy nodded. "Thank you," he called, winking at her before jumping onto the tracks and running after the beautiful woman. Claire tried to collect herself. A woman had taken off her coat and run into a subway tunnel. Then a schoolboy had run after her. Suddenly, Claire saw the beautiful woman on the platform running back towards the tunnel. Had Claire not noticed that she had come back out of the tunnel? "Hey, miss? Your coat!" Claire called after the woman as she ran past. The woman gave Claire a quick glance over her shoulder. No doubt about it. It was the same woman. "It's not mine!" she shouted curtly at Claire, then jumped onto the tracks as she had just done, apparently running back into the tunnel. But Claire could just make out that the woman was still wearing her dark blue cashmere coat before she, too, vanished into the darkness of the tunnel. Claire looked down, but she was undeniably still clutching the woman's identical coat. "What the hell is going on?" she asked aloud into the conspicuous silence, which was broken by a sudden crackle from the PA system. "Due to a technical fault, the Piccadilly line at Heathrow Airport has been delayed by a few minutes," the voice announced. Claire didn't think the problem was technical. It was definitely something to do with the two beautiful women, who were obviously twins. It didn't occur to Claire to connect the observed phenomenon with time travel. Her father had taught her that the simplest explanation was often the right one. For a man of faith, her father was very enlightened. If you saw two identical-looking people, they were almost certainly twins. That strange schoolboy who had dashed into the Piccadilly line tunnel definitely had something to do with it. Claire pondered, chewing her bottom lip for a moment. Then she leapt to her feet. She opened her school bag and rummaged around until she found a small torchlight. Claire had brought it for fixing blown fuses in her father's church. She allowed herself to stop thinking about the bizarre situation she had just witnessed. Overthinking had only fractured her heart. Claire wasted no time as she entered the subway tunnel with her torch. "Are you sure we're in the right place?" Britt heard her sister ask in her head as she walked through the dark underground. "Of course I'm sure. You know precisely what I had to undergo to gather the information about Lord Fowler's whereabouts." Britt shuddered at the thought. "Wow, I don't know how you put up with that horny old bastard." "I know," Britt thought, but she shut her sister out of any further thoughts. "I did it for one of us. I would have slept with the entire House of Lords to track him down." Britt came to an abrupt stop. The tunnel made a slight bend to the east. "Have you found it?" "I think I'm almost there, but I'll take care of the boy first. How much time do we have?" "I had to improvise," Siv replied. "I'd say 3 to 5 minutes. "That's fantastic. I work well under pressure, sister." Britt heard steps behind her. They were barely audible. You had to hand it to the boy. He impressed, considering his inexperience, but Britt didn't think he knew who he was messing with. Richard knew what was at stake. Taking on an opponent of the Eternals was no piece of cake. He knew the twins would not hesitate for a second to kill him if they had the chance. Well, he had no intention of giving them that chance. Carefully, he felt his way forward in the darkness. "Hello, boy," a smoky voice suddenly said behind him. Stunned, Richard whirled around. With incredible strength, the woman snatched Richard by the throat and effortlessly raised him, leaving his legs dangling helplessly in the air. The woman's eyes glowed a pale blue, making her face look pale and dead, and not at all attractive. Richard felt the woman gently tighten her grip around his neck. Instead of experiencing mortal fear, he felt only incredible excitement. The world of the Eternals is real. It's a fact. Being told about the world of the Eternals was one thing. Experiencing it was completely different. He became so euphoric that he felt himself stiffen. The woman noticed this and sneered as she looked down at Richard's midsection. "Is that a knife, or are you just happy to see me?" she asked. Richard grinned. "Both," he managed to say between his blue-tinged lips. In one swift motion, he drew the dagger from his pocket and stabbed the woman in the abdomen. "In eternum," he croaked triumphantly. The woman released him immediately, and Richard fell to the ground. She remained standing for a moment, puzzled as she looked down at the dagger embedded just above her belly. Then her legs gave way and she dropped to her knees. "Fuck!" she gasped. The surprise on her face was a priceless moment for Richard. He had defied a being from the world of the Eternals. Taking a deep breath, he relished the feeling of being able to breathe again. In one swift movement, he pulled the dagger from the woman's stomach. She stared at him in fear. "It's impossible," she muttered. "Believe it, bitch. Now you're finished," Richard said, raising his dagger. He would gouge out the glowing eyes of this scum. At that moment, Siv kicked him in the temple with her boot, and the schoolboy fell unconscious onto the tracks like a felled tree. "What the hell happened?" Siv asked as she rushed to her sister, who was clutching her stomach wound in pain. A bright blue, viscous substance dripped from between her fingers. "That bloody brat has a Sidonia dagger," hissed Britt. "Impossible," muttered Siv. "That's what I said," Britt whispered, groaning as her sister helped her. Siv picked up the dagger from the floor, allowed the blade of the seemingly harmless yet dangerous weapon to retract into the shaft, and examined it for a moment in disbelieving amazement before throwing it in a high arc onto the live rail. With a bright flash and a snap, the dagger imploded into a small pile of molten rock. Siv nodded at the unconscious boy. "What do we do with him?" she asked her sister. Britt shrugged. "You're the one with the ethics upgrade, sis." Siv nodded. "We'll take him with us, but first we'll do what we came here to do." However, Siv hesitated. Worried, she turned to her sister. "You've lost a lot of gels. Can you make it until we find a workshop where we can patch you up?" Britt bravely nodded. "Sure, I'm not made of sugar." Siv took off her coat and approached a section of the tunnel wall where the bricks differed slightly from the others. "Open sesame," she muttered, punching a hole in the brick wall with her gloved hand. After a few blows, she peered into the resulting opening. "Well," Britt asked, "is he there?" "Well," Britt asked, "is he there?" Siv looked at her sister and smiled. "Oh yes, he's there. Dusty. But what else would you expect after 45 years? "Then wake him up," Britt urged. "Isn't that what you're supposed to do?" Britt glanced down at herself in agony. The gel leaking from her insides was already beginning to clot. The wound glowed faintly in the dark. "Well, I guess you don't always get what you want in life," she sighed. "I'm sorry, sister," Siv said. "I know what this means to you, I do." "Go on so we can get out of here," Britt said. Siv poked her head through the opening and looked at the dust-covered head of the mechanical man, standing motionless like a long-forgotten statue. Over the past decades, which had felt like centuries to him during his hibernation, the mechanical man had traveled the world in his dreams. But in the recent past, was it months or years, he had returned to the same place again and again. He stood on the edge of a grassy cliff and looked out over the grey-blue canal. If he squinted, he could make out the French coast on the horizon. A flock of bluebirds flew overhead. The sight of them warmed his heart but dampened his spirits. There were no bluebirds on the Dover coast. He knew precisely why his sleeping mind was telling him this lie. Vera Lynn's song was to blame, of course. The song had been a popular hit in the town's dance halls the year they switched him off. It was strange what the mind clings to when it realizes it won't need to be used much longer. He felt drained and sensed that his energy was about to run out completely. They had advised him to erase such unimportant things as song lyrics from his memory. He had always refused to do that for Vera Lynn's song. I can see the hut singers coming over the cliffs of Dover. Tomorrow is already. You'll see them tomorrow. I'll never forget the people who faced the angry sky. I remember when the shadows came over us, the light of hope in their eyes. Hey, big guy, a woman's voice said behind him. The mechanical man turned. Standing in front of him was a tall blonde in a polka-dot summer dress. She was the type of woman Charlie, one of his colleagues in the War Office, would have called a grenade. "Who are you, dear lady?" the mechanical man asked. "And what are you doing in my dream?" "Oh dear," said the woman with a sigh. "If you don't recognize me, you won't recognize Britt. The storage elements for your long-term memory have erased a lot over the decades and put everything into system retention." "I'm not sure what that means, dear lady." "Dear lady is cute," the woman said. She wore her hair in a bun, though a blonde strand had come loose in the wind. The woman was beautiful, and her presence felt somehow right and good to the mechanical man. "Should I know you?" he asked. The woman smiled. "Yes." She stepped closer to the mechanical man, wrapping her long arms around his neck. Her breasts pressed against his chest, and she smelled of summer and jasmine. She stared at him with deep blue eyes radiating charm. "Time to wake up, Snow White," she said tenderly, kissing him softly on the lips. Stunned, the mechanical man opened his mouth. Her tongue sought his instantly. It was warm and tasted of strawberries. Then something clicked somewhere in his head. Instead of the scent of jasmine and the light of the sun on the Dover coast, darkness and the smell of burning wood surrounded him. The beautiful woman was still there, but she wasn't wearing a summer dress. Her blue eyes gleamed brilliantly in the pale semi-darkness as she poked her head through a hole in the wall. "Ew," she said, wiping her dust-covered mouth. "Almost as pleasant as kissing an ashtray." Confused, the mechanical man tried to comprehend the situation around him. "Where am I?" he asked the woman. "In a tunnel of the London Underground," she explained. "Why am I locked in here? I don't know the exact circumstances, but it was at the behest of Winston Churchill." Churchill. The name meant something to the mechanical man, though he couldn't quite grasp it. He thought he associated the smell of cigars with the name. "What year is it?" he asked. 1987. 1987, he repeated. 45 years. "Did we win the war?" he asked. "War?" The woman thought for a moment. "Oh, right, the war. Yes, we won it. Everything's fine." "What the hell is going on here?" another younger woman suddenly shouted. The mechanical man saw the light of a torch fall on the face of the woman who had kissed him. "Hey, little one," the woman said to the girl's voice in a soothing tone. The mechanical man poked his head out of the opening in the wall to get a better look. To his right, a young girl in a school uniform stood on the tracks of a subway tunnel. She hastily moved the torch in her hand from the woman to the mechanical man, and then to a second woman to his left, who was kneeling beside a motionless boy also wearing a school uniform. "What have you done to him?" the girl asked, pointing her torch to the unconscious boy. Her voice trembled with fear. "And why is that dirty guy stuck there?" "Dirty guy?" the mechanical man pondered. The girl evidently meant him. He opened his mouth to speak, but the girl suddenly wrapped her arms around her neck. Why can't I breathe?" the girl asked. Then the torch fell from her hand. She sank to her knees in a daze and collapsed unconscious. "We're running out of air," the woman announced, kneeling worriedly beside the girl. "We're in a dilemma," said the other woman, who strangely enough seemed to be a replica of the first. "We both don't have enough power left to get her and him." She nodded towards the mechanical man. "Out of here." "There's no way we're leaving them here," the first woman declared firmly to her own copy. We must already have dozens of lives in our conscience because of the fire. Fire? Is that why we're running out of air? The mechanical man asked, noticing that the air was increasingly being displaced by sooty smoke. We had to improvise, the woman's copy explained curtly, attempting to lift the boy to throw him over her shoulder, but she couldn't. She cried out in pain. I am more damaged than I thought, she gasped. We're not leaving anyone behind, the first woman insisted. I'll take the girl, the mechanical man explained. You take care of the boy and your copy. The two women exchanged glances before looking at the mechanical man. Did he just call me a copy? The woman's duplicate asked. The woman nodded in response. He seems to have lost much of his memory. Terrific. Together they lifted the unconscious boy. The woman shouldered him with remarkable strength and turned to the mechanical man. Can you free yourself? She asked. I think so, replied the mechanical man. The walls aren't very strong anymore. With that, the mechanical man took his first step in decades. It felt invigorating to move again, though he could feel protesting servos groaning within him. He pressed his body against the wall, and large sections of it collapsed, allowing him to step out of the track bed. He looked down at his tattered clothes in disbelief, struggling to comprehend what had happened. To his dismay, he realized he was nearly naked. Here, the woman's duplicate said, handing him a dark blue coat. This is better than nothing. The mechanical man put on the coat. It stretched at the shoulders but otherwise fitted him remarkably well. He then lifted the unconscious girl from the floor and turned to the two women. Let's go.
Down in London, where shadows creep, Churchill's secret kept so deep. A fella made of metal, strong and tall, but human after all. Won't away like a forgotten rhyme, lost in the slow march of time. Sleep, my friend, safe and sound, while bluebirds sing on chalky ground. 45 long years, dreams of white cliffs gleaming. Escaping the tomb, awakening slowly from metallic doors. Promises whispered like a budding rose, a second chance like a touching hand. Won't away like a forgotten rhyme, lost in the march of time. Step out now in the sun's warm ray, the metal man awakened here to stay.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Heinke Digital audiobook podcasts and its author, Christian Heinke, please visit heinke.digital.